Welcome, everybody, to our latest episode of the Barbell Nerds Podcast. Today we have Jordan Nieuwsma. He's a sports performance coach down at Elon in North Carolina. Welcome, Jordan. Thanks for being on the show with us. Just real briefly, or I guess it doesn't have to be brief, whatever you want. Tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into strength and conditioning, how you ended up at Elon, etc. Whatever you feel is relevant to tell us.
For sure. Thanks for having me on, guys. I really appreciate this. This is always fun, and it's great getting to know you guys more and just all the great stuff you guys are doing. But as far as my path into the field, it all started back in high school, just being at a small school, didn't have a weight room, but loved sports, always trying to get better at sports, and just found trying to research stuff and look things up to train myself, even if it was with minimal equipment or just learning to sprint and jump and do different things in my parents' backyard. And just how a tiny bit of knowledge in high school paid off for helping me get better and to progress into a better athlete, and just love seeing those results. And then going into college, knowing I wanted to be able to help people in a number of ways and have an impact on people. And I just thought strength and conditioning, sports performance was the best way to do that, as far as you get the most amount of time with the athletes than any other coach usually. And so you get to build those relationships really deep and have an impact more off the field as well. But then as far as on the field, you obviously can have a huge impact with just improving the physical, the psychological, and then even a little bit of the skill side as well. So that's kind of what kind of drove me into it. And then I've just been very fortunate to have crossed paths and been able to experience some other really good performance coaches along the way and be at multiple places. So during my undergrad, when I was still in school, I was playing football at Concordia St. Paul, which is a Division II small school. But down the road, University of Minnesota Gophers football program, I was able to intern basically whenever I wasn't doing my own football stuff. I was able to go down there and hang out with those guys and learn and help out where I could. And all of those guys, that was back with the Jerry Kill staff. So all of those guys have gone on to bigger and better things now. But it was a great learning experience, where just that first time of being in a college football environment, and they just supplied me with so many resources and pushed me in the right directions. And then from there, I was a graduate assistant at Concordia St. Paul, got to work with a number of other teams. And from there, I went back to Minnesota, worked with Cal Dietz for a little bit, went from there to Wisconsin, got to work with their football program there. And then now down here at Elon, working with, right now I assist with football, and then I work with men's soccer, women's soccer, and men's golf. And I've worked with a couple other teams since I've been down here. I helped out with basketball some, and then I also worked with tennis a lot over the last couple of years, and a couple other small teams. But then mixed in there throughout that time, I also tried to get experiences other places of being in the private side, and worked with a physical therapist clinic and a more sports performance clinic, and then a chiropractic performance clinic and club volleyball as well. So just tried to get a lot of different perspectives on things. And I definitely can say that all of those different places have helped me become a better coach. So no matter where you're at right now, there's definitely a lot to learn from. Whether you're in a private, whether you're Division I, Division III, high school, wherever it is, there's so much you can learn and that you can take to that next position. So, yeah.
Yeah, you've been all over. Well, one thing I really wanted to ask you about is something, because I'm looking at your Instagram right now. You posted about like aerobic conditioning and tempo runs, and I think it's got to be your soccer players, and they're doing extensive tempo runs, changing directions. Can you just talk about the purpose of that? Do you do normal tempo runs in a straight line? Just where you're sitting at with the tempo runs and the type of tempo runs you're doing with your athletes.
Yeah, so kind of like I mentioned back when I got that first internship with Minnesota, they were big on Charlie Francis, and I was able to read a bunch of his resources, and obviously looked into like Derek Hansen, James Smith, and those guys who are all big into tempo runs, and used them on myself as an athlete as well, and just saw a number of the benefits to it. And that's where I was for a long time, but then the more I've continued to just dive down different realms, it's helped me to evolve kind of just using tempo runs into more of a sport specific fashion. So actually a book I read, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe last year, by Martin Bouchette. He really opened my eyes to a lot of things of just what we're trying to do as far as increase our aerobic capacity, our aerobic power in that high-low approach of tempo runs. And he breaks it down into 10 different variables of interval training. And so just simply put, I'll read them off here for you, but you can just break any sport basically is interval based. So you can break it down into these 10 different intervals. So you have intensity of work interval, you have the duration of work interval, you have the duration of rest interval, you have that intensity of rest interval. Then number 5 is you have the intensity of rest between series. And then number 6 is duration between series rest. And 7 is number of intervals, so basically your reps. 8 is number of series, so the sets. And 9 is total performed and total reps. So that could be total work performed, could be total reps and or total duration of the workout. And then number 10, that last one, is that exercise modality. So that could be running, on a bike, lifting, grappling, sled pushes, million different variations there. So kind of like when I saw him break it down so simply, and then also taking these other approaches of a James Smith, someone like Cam Joss or Fergus Conley, and even Charlie Francis as well, of, okay, we need to analyze the game and start working backwards from the game and realize what are those things that are going to cause the most fatigue for our athletes and how we can best improve that. So obviously a sport like football, a sport like soccer, your maximum output of max velocity, max power are obviously very important. So we put those on our high days, our high CNS days that are going to cause a lot of stress towards our nervous system. Then on those lower days, we still realize that our endurance or our just repeat sprint ability, repeat power ability is going to be very important to having that edge on our competition as far as conditioning goes. And so that way, to be able to identify those things and then build it up in an off-season period so that we are at or above a level of our opponents. So like, for example, in football, we know a lot of those numbers, same with soccer as well, where we start to look at those 10 different categories of intervals and then pick apart, okay, what is the game? So the game is going to set our volume as far as what is our 100%. So we can work up to that 100%. Or if you look at like a Tim Gabbett, a lot of his research, he even talks about working up to 120% of that game value. So like, for example, like a total distance that a skill position, a defensive back or a wide receiver is going to cover in a game. This is not counting walking. So any amount of volume that they're covering above a walk would be about 4,000 to 7,000 yards. And I know it's a wide range, but that's basically, being at Elon, being at a Division II school, being at 2 Power 5 schools, those numbers stay pretty within that range. So obviously it's going to be a little different for what kind of offense you're running or you're facing, but it's still great to have and important to have that bullseye of what are we shooting for, what is our 100%, and what do we need to get up to. So from there, we're able to take that total number, and then we also know that, okay, a football game consists of about 75 plays, and a series consists about 15, or there's about 15 series in a game. There's about 5 plays per series. And we know we're going to work for about 3 to 7 seconds in a given play or something. So we can take all of those pieces and start to kind of put them together. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do with football and with soccer, is just taking that hard data, those parameters, identifying how those fit into those 10 different variables, and then work it out from there.
How did you, oh, go ahead, Sean.
Go.
Yeah, so how did you get these variables with soccer? Did you time time duration of rest, time duration of set, time duration of work, somehow measure their intensity yourself, or did you dig into research for that?
Yeah, so both. I've worked with soccer at 2 other schools, so I've had that data from GPSs and accelerometers and stuff. So how many accelerations are we making in a game? How much total distance are we covering in a game? And obviously we know the duration of the game. And then our coaches at Elon have actually done a really good job of breaking down that per position of those distances, those sprint distances, the number of sprints, the number of high intensity accelerations, decelerations. So we have that data from our in-house studies. But then, just soccer is a really well-studied sport. So if you want to learn more about soccer, you can learn more about soccer. And there's tons of research on it. There's tons of books on it that we've just tried to compile all of those things to get a better picture of what we're doing. So that has been really helpful. But the first time I did it and kind of put it all together, I was a little bit nervous that because in the past, anytime I had done traditional tempo runs, it's about 3 sets of 10, 2 sets of 10, because that's what Charlie Francis talks about. That's what a lot of Derek Hansen talks about, which is great. But we also have to identify that they are prescribing that for sprinters, usually 100, 200 meter sprinters. So that volume is probably appropriate for those athletes. But for a soccer player who's going to run, trying to remember my number off the top of my head, but over 10,000 yards in a game, right? And a defensive back who might run 5,000 yards in a game, that number isn't quite high enough for them. So we need to make it and tailor it towards our sport. And that's where I was a little bit nervous the first time I did it, because the number that I was using was 7,000 yards of total work that we're going to build up to. And I was like, there's no way that they're going to be able to handle this. Anytime I've, talked to some other people, they're like, we want to have lower volume. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, especially when we're starting to talk about the difference between your aerobic system and your CNS driven system. So all tempo runs, we're going to keep under 70% max velocity. And we're going to really emphasize that aerobic system and that local muscular endurance. So you can go, because it's such a low intensity, you can go for a long time or do a lot of reps, a lot of volume, and be able to recover. And it's actually going to enhance, from my experience of timing 10s and timing fly 10s, it's going to enhance that maximal CNS work on your high days. So one of the concepts that kind of opened this up to me as well was reading Mike Isertel's How Much Should I Train book. And it's written more towards bodybuilders and hypertrophy of muscle, but his concept of how he breaks it down, I think, is very applicable. And he even talks about it. He doesn't go into it deeply because he's more focused on that population, but he talks about how the different systems have different amount of volumes, obviously, that they can handle. So a lot of times we hear the buzzword of minimal effective dose, which is, sometimes relevant, obviously, especially when we're talking about sprinting and stuff. But when we're talking about the aerobic system, it's a lot more deeper than that. So he breaks it down, not just minimum effective dose. He breaks it down into you have your minimum effective volume. So that was what most people would call minimum effective dose. And then you have the top number, that threshold is going to be that max recoverable volume. And then that space in between is that max adaptive volume. So we might start a training block and we're going to pick a number that we know is going to be that minimum effective volume. But the problem is our athletes are going to recover from that minimum effective volume. And then the next time they train or the next week, that same number isn't going to be effective, right? It's going to be more of a maintenance volume. So we have to continue to increase within that max adaptive volume. And then as we get going throughout our 8-week block or whatever, we want to try and get up to that maximum recoverable volume to really challenge the system and really raise our threshold of what we can handle. So like to compare and contrast our CNS, that gap, that window of training is very narrow, where you might start week 1 with 5 sets of 10-yard sprints. And so you're only hitting 50 yards of volume. And if you only stayed at 10-yard sprints the whole time, which I don't recommend, but just for sake of explanation, and you may only really benefit from having 12 reps of maximum intensity sprinting to really increase that 10-yard sprint. So like your range is really narrow there, as opposed to tempo runs or aerobic conditioning. You could, if a guy comes in really low quality shape, they might start with 2 or 3 sets of 10 reps, but by the end, they should be up to 6, 7 sets of 10, 12 reps of tempo runs. So I think it's just important to continue to increase that gas tank or that capacity that they have, which then again helps them in all those other high intensity areas because their system just becomes so efficient at recovering.
That whole thing I loved, because all I did was think, like, I did this with my soccer girls whenever I was at UND. I was like, you guys are pushing 7,000 yards. Holy crap, that's awesome. Like, just because I'm pretty sure we got up to 5,000, maybe 5,200 yards by the end of an off season. Granted, we did that twice. We did it twice a week. Yep. And then we'd kind of pair our longer days, or later in the off season, we would pair those with hill sprints, as to not just completely smoke their CNS during the week, so they could still get some sprinting in their practice.
Yeah.
I guess my question is, how are you building them up like that? Like, how are you starting your tempo runs? When are you starting your tempo runs? And then how, moving right into season or even preseason, are you continuing those through as a recovery tool for games, practices, and stuff?
Yep. So
yeah, if I could add to that question, how long does it typically take for them to get to that end phase?
Yeah. So I'll use our football example of how we've done our off seasons, the last couple off seasons, just because it is a little bit unique for me at Elon. Most of our over 50% of our roster is from overseas. So I send them home with this program, and they do a really good job of following it and checking in with me. But I think I can just paint a clearer picture for you with using just the football example with that, if that makes sense. So typically football, either in a winter training block or a summer training block, you're going to get 8 to 10 weeks of training. And so we've kind of built this out for an 8-week block. And we like having just our parameters. So we break down those 10 different interval variables, and I'll walk through the specific numbers I'll use here in a second. But we like having those numbers laid out on the front end. So then when we go into the workout or that week of the workout, we can be a little bit more creative with the modalities that we're using. So it doesn't have to just be 7 sets of 10 reps of just straight linear tempo runs. So that's to go back to Will's question of using multi-directional movements or using getting more skill involved with it as well. We do try and get to that as much as we can to break up the monotony for the athletes and to realize football isn't, and soccer and any other team sport isn't played in just a linear fashion. We have to prepare for all of those variables and using a lot of different modalities to accomplish that. So getting into just the breakdown of the numbers and how we progress it. So we'll take their 40 time, and we won't actually time their 40. We just have their fly 10 numbers we do it every week in training. So we just use the most recent, most accurate data for that. And then we'll group the team into their speed groups. So if they're estimated to run like a 4.6 or they're estimated to run like a 4.7, we'll just spot or put them in different spots so that when we put the timer on, we do it all based on a timer so that let's say I'm giving them a 10-second rep, then they know, okay, this one group has to be at 55 yards, the other group has to be at 57 yards at that 10 seconds. And so that way it loosens us up as coaches a lot because it's all based on a timer, and we get to walk around and coach and talk with the guys and girls, but we're not sitting there with a stopwatch every rep, making sure we're not messing up. So we do like to put on an interval timer. But all right, so getting into the specific numbers. So like week 1, I'm just going to use an example from a guy estimated to run a 4.55 or a 4.6. So week 1, the distance of their reps would be 100 yards. We're going to work for 18 seconds, rest for 54 seconds. We're going to do 3 sets of 11. And that worked out to a total of 33 efforts of repeat acceleration, aerobic work, and 3,000 yards. Okay, then jumping ahead, we'll go to, let's say, week 3. They're going to be at 82 yards of work, working for 14 seconds, resting for 35 seconds, doing 5 sets of 13, and that's a total of 65 efforts or 5,000 yards. And then as we get into week 6, that would be 50 yards of work, getting down into more specific work-rest ratios of working for 8 seconds, resting for 18 seconds, doing 6 sets of 14 reps, and that's 84 efforts and 4,200 yards. So the yards are starting to go down. The total efforts or total plays, as we would count in football, is continuing to go up. And then week 8, then we're going to finish with 26 yards of work, working for 4 seconds, resting for 18 seconds. And then they're going to do 6 sets of 17 reps. And that comes out to 100 reps or 102 total efforts and 2,600 yards of work.
That's awesome. And really, I can't wait to go back through this episode and actually like write these down, look at these, and I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to make sure I write down the book that you mentioned by whoever it was that you said, because I want to look at these 10 variables and everything.
Yeah.
But my question, since obviously these sports we're always discussing, they're not just strictly linear, have you added any curved sprinting into it? So like if I train my soccer girls on the football field and we have the numbers where they're kind of weaving in and out between the numbers, everything. I added that to their tempo runs as well. Is that something that you've done similarly? And if so, how do you keep the same parameters except for like maybe time, because it takes a little bit different to sprint curve?
Yep. Absolutely. So that's why we like to have those numbers laid out. Okay. Like we know we got to hit these efforts. We know we got to hit this work rest ratio and follow this progression. And then we can be as creative as we want to be and really make it more fun and engaging for the athletes. So to use an example of what I've been doing with soccer lately is we would go, we call it our 8-vector breakdown. And basically that is, you have your linear straight ahead. You have your forward if you're cutting, going forward, and then cutting at 135 degrees. And then we have your 90-degree cut, and then we have your 45-degree, more acute angle cut, and then a 0 or 180-degree cut, however you want to describe it. But so those are kind of the different cutting angles, because I'm not huge on using just closed change of direction or pro agility type of work that is just monotonous and doesn't transfer to the sport. But I do like breaking it down into those 4 different cuts so that we can develop that strength, that resilience to decelerate, withstand, and transmit force in all those different angles. That we just need to make sure from a injury resilience standpoint that we're covering all of those bases. So doing it during extensive aerobic tempo run type of setting works really well, that we're able to build up that resilience. So how it works and how I set up the field when we do that. I basically spread out all across the sideline. We'll go every other station is a linear tempo run. So they'll run down, they'll run back. And I've been working on some different things with that as well, just trying to really emphasize upright running technique. So every other rep, I'd have them hold a ball in front of them, driving their knee up, working more on that technique. Still everyone's working for the same amount of work-rest ratio. So they go down and back, and then they shift over to the next station on the field. So everyone shift to their left, and then we would have every other station would be one of those different angles set up. So like you mentioned, we will also throw in a curved linear run. We'll throw in a figure eight, and then we'll get into those 8 vector cuts. So the ones I typically use are a 135-degree Z cut, just putting cones down, encouraging them to also just be creative in those angles. So I want them to move through that angle, but I want them to pick a different cut or be a little bit creative with that cut every single time. So guys will throw in spin moves, they'll throw in head fakes, stuff like that, cutting at that 135 degrees. Then the next one I set up is a 90-degree cut. So that would be a box. 4 corners on a box makes 90 degrees. Just working through that, just continuing in that same direction. So I'm running, cutting off my right leg, turning towards my left. Let's say we're working for 8 seconds. They're going for the entire 8 seconds. Then they'll stop. And then the second rep, they'll go the opposite direction. And then that next station would be a triangle to hit that 45-degree more acute angle. So just 3 corners on a triangle, hitting those cuts. And then the next one, the last one, would be a 0-degree typical shuttle, go touch a line, come back, stuff like that. So they just continue to work through that, hitting 2 reps at each station. Every other one is a linear tempo run, and they'll work through that for the prescribed work, rest, and total amount of sets and reps for that day.
Are you touching any of this in season? Or are you relying just on practice and games to get their work in, I guess?
Right. So once we do get into in season, we have found it's not doing us any benefit to do more conditioning on top of what they're already doing. Especially, both the sports that I'm working with primarily now, football and soccer, they both get plenty of work in season that we don't need to hit it. But it's great for introductory phases. It's great for transition phases. So coming off of this longer Christmas break now, we're going to go into our season for the spring because it's got pushed back for the spring for football and soccer. And so for soccer, we will use this as a transition piece where we're having shorter practices, and then we'll finish with some aerobic conditioning at the end of practice using this as well. And then one other thing, touching on the modalities part that we've really liked messing around with and getting to know Andy Ryland at USA Football and some of that stuff is with football. Yeah, he's awesome. He does a great stuff. But looking at football and especially the more physical positions like your offensive and defensive line or your linebackers, yes, running is important for some of those mid positions, but not super important for your linemen. And so we're trying to introduce them as much as possible to that physical contact that they're going to experience on the field. So we'll use a variety of different grappling, a variety of different just manual resistance of like a lateral push to move manual resistance, or make it more competitive where they're fighting over a line, pushing against each other laterally. And then sled pushes is also a great one. And a variety of a combination of all of those things has been fun to play around with.
Yeah, I like how you talked about staying out of that middle zone and letting practice and other things take care of that middle zone, staying in the high and the low phases. Sean, how much time do we have left?
At least over 10 minutes, and nothing's really popped up yet, so we should be good. It's probably just a little over 10 minutes.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about what you do in the weight room with soccer now that we've touched on what you do conditioning wise with them? What is their weight
Yeah.
room like?
Yeah, so their weight room stuff. I approach the weight room from a standpoint of the weight room is most beneficial for improving and increasing our outputs. So that max strength, that max power, and the field is most useful for improving max speed. And then obviously the aerobic stuff we just mentioned. But the weight room, I really am trying to attack using jumps and weighted jumps as our main power development. And we'll go all the way from, I like to use over their 4 years, I like to use a really broad spectrum of different periodization schemes and set rep schemes. So like as a freshman, they'll come in, they'll start off with 1x20. And then when they go through all the different programs, seniors are more focused on spending more time in a velocity-based zone or a jump height-based zone using jump mats to work in certain strength zones. But we really try and utilize jumps and loading those jumps, going from extensive to intensive to then a true plyometric. And then the lifting side, it's all about, okay, we're increasing those outputs, but then it's also all about building the most resilient athlete we can build. So breaking down that game again from what are those areas of most concern, what are those most common injuries, and how can we build those up to make as a robust athlete as possible and reduce injuries. So the most common injuries I see in soccer and through research and just us keeping track of it is groins, hamstrings, and ankles, and concussions, right? So we do the typical, we'll do unilateral push exercises, we'll do bilateral push exercises, we'll do upper body to just build up overall coordination and strength. And then we'll target those groins a lot. We'll do a ton of Copenhagen's, we have cable machines in our weight room. So a lot of hip adduction, and then going from a more isolated approach into a more integrated or multi-joint approach. So starting out early in the phases with hip adduction, like a standing hip adduction cable exercise, a Copenhagen, and then going into a band or a cable lateral push to move, a sled lateral push to move, or a crossover step to get more of the groin, and then making it more dynamic with the bands going in and out, kind of making it an overspeed or a overload with that band, going crossover step or push to move. And then ankles would be another big one. So making sure we're always doing, I like to call it three-way ankle. So getting our dorsiflexion, inversion, eversion, and then hitting the backside as well of soleus and gastroc, making sure we're getting those very strong. So one of the things I got from Chris Corfus was he utilizes those 3-position ankle iso holds, just all the different positions of the ankle, getting those nice and strong, and then we'll overload them a lot with like a safety bar, hand supported, heel raise, and a bunch of different variations of stuff like that. So just trying to target as much as we can that resilience, and then increasing that power is how we approach the weight room.
I like that. And you said from your ankle complex or your ankle training from Corpus, is that the spring ankle thing that he talks about? Because I'm doing that with I'm doing that with all of my like youth athletes right now. They're doing the 1x20, they're doing the spring ankle, and I'm actually doing it myself because I have a dream of 2021 to be able to dunk again, Will. And Will's launch program is going to help me get there, right, bud?
Let's go.
But as we wrap up a little bit, we had a single question asked from the audience. I'll let you be the guest as to who asked this question. Let me bring it up here real quick. We had a question posed that was, how do you handle working for someone significantly dumber than you are?
Great question, Nick. No, no, that's not the case at all. I'm very fortunate to have a boss that's very educated and very open-minded to a lot of things that I've brought to the table and other staff members have brought to the table. And just a collaboration of all of those ideas has really helped us to continue to grow. But I would just say, like, it is everyone wants to be the director or the title or whatever. But I would say to any other coach out there, no matter what your title is or what your position is you can have a positive impact on the people above you, even though it can be challenging at times. Of like, obviously it's not always the way you had wanted it or like your exact program, but that also is going to challenge you in a good way as an assistant. So just being very positive and being very team orientated and realizing it's not all about you. It's about the team or your athletes, and you're doing it for them. So realizing that you're not always your ideas. And so don't get too tied to any good or bad idea you might have, because it may go, it may not, but just constantly trying to bring new ideas to the table. And if one doesn't work, then bring another idea. And if you're bringing good ideas, eventually they're going to crack through, and it'll be for the best. So yeah, no, it's a good question.
Love it. We're wrapping up on time here, Jordan. We'd like to thank you for taking the time to do this with us. I have one last question for you before we take off here. Who's one person you would recommend that we reach out to bring on in the near future?
Yeah. I mean, you guys have had so many good guests on already, but one person that I think doesn't get probably enough attention he's kind of just one of those guys that does his thing and isn't trying to like post it on social media and is a little bit under the radar, but does a really phenomenal job, is Cam Ringstead with our basketball team at Elon. I think he does things with basketball that I don't see other basketball performance coaches doing. And I think it's going to pay off in the long run for them, and their guys are getting better on a daily basis. And he's very detailed, and I mean, every guy is taken care of to what they need and to a very high level. So I think he would always be a very interesting guest just to see if he can crack into what he's doing, because he's doing some good stuff.
Awesome.
Elon Sports Performance Roundtable needs to happen, because if you guys got a great staff. When you love your content that you guys put out, everyone does.
Absolutely.
Probably the most followed sports performance Instagrams out there, I would assume. Besides Kier, but Kier's out there doing whatever he wants.
He's a whole brand himself. So
it's true. Well, Jordan, it was nice meeting you, and thank you so much for taking the time out to be on our podcast. We appreciate it.
A lot of good stuff here.
Thank you guys so much. Hopefully we'll stay in touch here, and I'll see how you guys are doing. But thank you guys for having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
For sure. Take care, Jordan.
Thanks, guys.